So many people now find themselves here without jobs, without social security, and living in poverty. And this has also led to a certain degree of social unrest. So it's definitely not an easy period.
On February 26, the coronavirus landed in Latin America when Brazil confirmed a case in São Paulo. Since then, governments across the region have taken an array of actions to protect their citizens and contain the spread of the devastating respiratory disease called by the World Health Organization COVID-19. But by July 2020, Latin America had become the region with the highest number of confirmed cases globally, accounting for more than a quarter of cases in the world. Aside from the health risks, this disease has produced a huge economic impact as well. The World Bank forecasted in June 2020 that Latin America and the Caribbean as a whole would see a GDP contraction of 7.2% this year. By the time this episode was recorded, these figures had changed to show an even worrisome economic impact. Beyond governmental aid to the underprivileged, it's clear that Latin America has been hardly hit by deep humanitarian, economic, and political consequences. That's what today's Paris Talks guest wants to talk about. Esther Kuisch Laroche is an educator and the current UNESCO representative for Costa Rica, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Panama. In this episode, Esther is addressing the question the Season 2 of the Paris Talks podcast has been asking. If we were to start a new normal, what and how should it be? Welcome to the Paris Talks podcast. We are trying to understand the post-COVID-19's new normal through inspiring stories and testimonies from innovators, community influencers, and policy designers.
My name is Esther Kuisch Laroche, and I'm the director of the UNESCO office in San Jose. I'm also the UNESCO representative for Costa Rica, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Panama, and have been working with international NGOs and UN agencies for the past 22 years. I first joined the UN as an intern in 1998, and I got my first paid job with the UN in Geneva in 2002. Since then, I've worked in many different countries, in Africa, Asia, the Middle East, and Latin America, in areas such as human rights, humanitarian assistance, and development. I was born in Suriname, which is a small country in South America, and I actually have quite an interesting ethnic background. My father has both Indian and Dutch ancestors, and my mother's ancestors were from Africa and England. So I literally feel like a global citizen. I was raised in the Netherlands as at the age of 2, and after finishing my master's degree, I left the Netherlands for my first job in Mexico. Since then, I've always lived and worked abroad. Prior to moving to Costa Rica, I lived in Iran for 4 years. I was the director of the UNESCO office for Afghanistan, Iran, Pakistan, and Turkmenistan. The thing I love most about my work and my career in the United Nations is that it's given me an opportunity to travel the world. I've been to 135 countries in the world, and I've lived in many different countries. And what I love is learning about different cultures and experiencing how people live in different parts of the world. I really think that our cultural and natural diversity is what makes this planet such a unique and beautiful place.
El coronavirus dejó hasta la fecha más de 200.000 infectados, más de 9.000 muertos, miles de millones de dólares en pérdidas económicas y un mundo paralizado. Pero ¿cómo llegamos hasta acá? El 31 de diciembre de 2019, la Organización Mundial de la Salud reporta los primeros casos de neumonía detectados en la ciudad china de Wuhan, de un virus hasta el momento desconocido.
When I first heard about the coronavirus at the beginning of the year, I must admit I wasn't too concerned about it. I really didn't think it was going to develop into the pandemic that we see today. My last international trip was to Brazil in the first week of March, and about a week after I returned is when the lockdown and quarantine measures started here in Costa Rica. I guess for me, the biggest change has been not being able to travel. Travel has always been a very central part of my life for the past 2 decades. I've always had jobs that entailed a lot of travel, and I currently cover Central America. So prior to the pandemic, I was traveling very often to the different countries to work with our government counterparts and also to visit local and indigenous communities. To me, that was very important because obviously there's a lot that can be done remotely and online, but I think you can't really fully understand the realities of a country unless you've been there, unless you've traveled around to different areas, and unless you've talked to local people. So I'm really grateful that I was able to do that before the pandemic hit, so that I at least knew my countries well before we had to switch to this online working mode.
Morning folks, it's Thursday the 6th of February, middle of a ghost town here. 1.3 million people all hiding. It's dire here, it's very dire. There's people dropping on the footpath literally. I can't wait to get out of here, it's terrible.
A city of 11 million people in lockdown.
So here I am sitting at home because after returning from Hubei province at the heart of the coronavirus outbreak, everybody's told you need to go into quarantine. You can't be exposed to others for several weeks.
When I first heard about the lockdown measures, I wasn't shocked or too bothered with it, to be honest. I simply had to adjust to working in a different way. But at the same time, it was also great for me to be able to spend time at home with my family and to do things that I normally never get to do. I think the fact that I've moved around so much has given me a capacity to adapt quite easily to different circumstances. I've also lived in countries at war where we've had curfews and travel restrictions in place, so for me that was not really a new thing. So actually the first few weeks of the lockdown were actually quite fun for me. I spent a lot of time playing with my kids, doing sports and games. I started cooking and baking with YouTube videos, which I had never done before. I'm a terrible cook and I've never taken an interest in the kitchen ever. So that was pretty cool. But then very quickly, I would say after about 3 weeks, our workload started to increase dramatically with a lot more demands for assistance from the different countries, but also a huge increase in requests for information updates from many different sources. Our headquarters, regional organizations, governments, you name it. And so suddenly I found that we were in a situation where we had to connect to video conferences literally all day long, starting at 4 or 5 a.m. because of the time difference with our headquarters in Paris, until very late at night. And so suddenly from one day to another, I felt like there were no more normal working days or working hours. People would call you on the weekend, they would call you on official holidays, and somehow you were expected to be online 24/7 and to be able to respond to emails at any given time of the day or night and to respond to meeting requests at any kind of ungodly hour. So that started to generate a lot of stress for my staff, and it also became difficult to handle for myself. So that's where I felt that as a director, as a leader, I had to really put some measures in place to reestablish a work-life balance for all of our staff, and to also make it clear to my team that they should feel free to disconnect after working hours and to say no to meeting invitations at unreasonable hours. One of the things we've also had to do at the level of the UN country team is that we hired a psychologist to be able to support staff to cope with this new situation. It's not just the fact that people had to deal with restrictions and having to stay at home, but many people have lost family members or friends, so they were dealing with issues of grief.
Abuelita, así estemos lejos, aquí estamos todos por ti.
Madre hermosa, acá estamos todos, mamá, explicándole a Dios.
¿Cuánto daría por estar allá? Poderte abrazar, poderte besar y decirte cuánto te amo.
Abuelita hermosa, Mira tu amorcito aquí dormido. Lo tengo en mis brazos dormidito, como te encantaba verlo dormir ahora.
Many were not able to go to the funerals. They were not able to say goodbye to their loved ones. Others have had to deal with sick family members. Others have had to struggle with childcare and dealing with distance education. So there were many different factors that made us feel that we had to hire a psychologist to support the staff. Now I feel like we're in a phase where we've all settled down into this new normality and we found a balance. And I must say I'm very proud of the achievements of my team in the past 7 months. I believe they've done an incredible job in spite of often difficult personal circumstances. I think that as a team, we really managed to stay very united, motivated, and committed, and we've been able to support our member states throughout this entire period. Fortunately for myself, nobody in my family has been affected by COVID-19, but one of our consultants in the office has gotten sick, and she's actually currently at home recovering from COVID.
As the coronavirus infection is spreading and risking the lives of people globally, it has also created a deep economic distress. The corporate sector might see a 6% default rate, with sectors like aviation, textiles, power and construction showing a higher rate, with around 3% default in the retail segment. With layoffs and pay cuts seen in the aviation and other segments, following will be the causes of concerns after the pandemic is over: unemployment, liquidity risk, and business risk. In addition to the announced stimulus packages, McKinsey suggests a large stabilization package to contain the problem of a magnitude like this.
I think that looking at the impact of COVID on our work, we've been able to carry out most of our activities remotely and online. There are some activities that were planned to be implemented in local communities, which we've had to postpone to next year. And I'd say especially working with indigenous communities has become a lot more complicated due to the lack of access to internet and also computers in many of these communities. The pandemic has had a huge socioeconomic impact in the countries in our region. Unemployment numbers have reached record highs, many businesses have gone bankrupt, and the halt in international tourism has had a huge impact. And of course, the cultural sector has also been very hard hit. So many people now find themselves here without jobs, without social security, and living in poverty. And this has also led to a certain degree of social unrest. So it's definitely not an easy period. And one of my main concerns is really the impact of the pandemic on education. As the digital divide here is very big and it's become very obvious in this period, many children here in the region do not have access to internet, they don't have a computer at home, so they have not been able to follow online classes and stay in touch with their teachers. Another issue as well is that many parents with low education levels have not been able to help their children at home with their distance learning. So this also highlights other existing inequalities. We're already seeing a rise in the number of school dropouts, and I'm very concerned about the consequences that this will have for the lives of these children and also for the longer-term sustainable development of these countries. Many children of poor families depended on school feeding programs, and we're now also seeing an increase in malnutrition rates. And, not even to mention the domestic and gender-based violence, which has also increased during the past 7 months. So the closure of schools really has an impact on many different levels.
Breaking developments in the coronavirus pandemic. The death toll rising in the U.S., more than 60 dead.
Doctors on the front lines in Italy with an ominous warning tonight, calling this the apocalypse and telling the world to get ready.
Well, most of us have never lived through anything like this.
No one is immune to the COVID-19 virus. It threatens all of us.
Now imagine a world where mass outbreaks of deadly diseases are commonplace. Well, it sounds scary, but that might not be too far off. The World Health Organization has warned that we're entering a new phase where such a reality is, quote, a new normal.
So how do I envisage the new normal? Well, I know that there are many reasons to be worried or skeptical, but as I look towards the future, I choose to be hopeful. And I hope that the new normal will be better and will bring us one step closer to more just and more inclusive societies. Because I think this pandemic has clearly shown us that our current way of life and our economic models are not sustainable. We live in a world with huge inequalities, in which many people do not have access to even the most basic services. And this crisis has really laid bare the situation and allowed us to see where the gaps and the needs are. And that in itself is an important opportunity. I hope that instead of waiting for things to go back to the way they were, which really wasn't all that great, we will focus on creating a new way of life that will be better for our planet, but also for all of the people who are currently being left out. I hope that governments will start to take their commitments towards combating climate change much more seriously, and I hope they will take decisive steps towards protecting our environment, because there is a very direct link between biodiversity conservation, climate change, and global pandemics. With regards to people, it has become clear that the poorest and more marginalized populations, including ethnic minority groups, are disproportionately affected by the pandemic. But before the pandemic, Latin America was already the most unequal region in the world. So if governments don't focus on equity right now and prioritize support to those most in need, then we will further increase the gap between rich and poor. So I hope we will really collectively seize this moment as a wake-up call. Because it is not just a moment of crisis, it is a moment of great opportunity, an opportunity for us to improve things and to rethink our systems. In general terms, I imagine that online meetings and flexible working arrangements are here to stay. And this may help us to reduce our carbon footprint and enable people to find a better work-life balance. It may also have a positive impact on gender equality and on the careers of women in particular. Going back to the topic of education, I think now is a great opportunity to completely rethink our approach to education, change our rigid and rather outdated systems, look at more innovative, flexible, and learner-centered ways of teaching, and create content that is much more relevant for this 21st century, with an eye towards the future. We have to focus on those competencies that young people need in the decades to come. If we take advantage of the lessons learned this year with regards to distance learning and flexible learning, and if governments should decide to invest in bridging the digital divide now, that could be a real game changer for developing countries and provide new opportunities for young people. I know that perhaps that's easier said than done in some countries, but in Central America, where I am based, the countries are small, and so I believe that in partnership with the private sector, it is totally possible to extend internet coverage to all areas in a relatively short period of time. I also hope that this pandemic will strengthen multilateralism and international cooperation, because it is clear that we are in this all together. Every country around the world has been affected by this pandemic, and we are facing some major global challenges, including climate change, that no country can tackle on its own. It's obvious that we are in an interconnected world, and our actions here and today have an impact on people elsewhere on the planet and also on future generations. So I hope that we will strengthen international solidarity and cooperation, and that countries will unite in an effort to build a more resilient world. In 2015, all world leaders made a commitment to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. This is a very ambitious agenda to eradicate poverty and hunger, protect our planet, and build peaceful and inclusive societies. It is linked to 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which all countries are supposed to achieve by the year 2030. We don't have much time left, but I believe that if there is political will, we can get there. It is now on us to act and to redouble our efforts to build more inclusive societies and ensure that no one is left behind. If we all work together, governments, civil society, the private sector, and international organizations, we can build on this moment to create a better normal. It is my sincere hope that in 2030, we will look back at this year, not thinking that 2020 was a disaster, but thinking 2020 was the turning point. That was the year that allowed us to accelerate progress towards sustainable development.
Thank you for listening to the Paris Talks podcast. This and the previous episodes have been produced by me, Michael Bahati. Our theme song is Nipe Story by Sharma Mushaga. Additional music has been provided by Sumana and Pixabay. For any question related to this or any other episodes of this podcast, please reach out via Twitter at Paris Talks or send us an email to contact@paris-talks.com. contact@paris-talks.com.
Puedes ir a cualquier parte, el camino es libre y ancho para caminar.